Have you ever seen a photograph that changes before your very eyes? This isn't a camera glitch. It's not Photoshop. Not some elaborate prank. I'm talking about a physical photograph, an old black and white print, that shifts and warps every single night. It was taken in a forgotten village deep in the Carpathian Mountains, and it's said to be tied to a tragic, terrifying event that no one dares speak of. The people in the photo? They're no longer alive. At least, not in the way we understand life. They say this image holds a dark secret, something alive inside it, something that remembers, something that wants out. I didn't believe the stories. Not at first. I've explored hundreds of abandoned places and investigated plenty of urban legends. But nothing ever stuck with me like this photo. Why? Because I lived with it. I watched it change. And eventually, it watched me back. It started on my last day in Romania. I had spent weeks traveling through remote towns, photographing forgotten places for my paranormal blog. I was exhausted, eager to head home, when an old woman at a roadside stall slipped me a note. It simply read, "The forest remembers. Ask for Petru." Curious, and maybe a little bored, I followed the directions she gave me to a weather-worn house at the edge of the woods. The man who answered was ancient, with watery eyes and hands that shook when he handed me an envelope sealed with wax. He didn't speak much, just muttered, "It's yours now. Don't let it near your bed." Inside the envelope was a photograph. Faded, black and white. 5 people stood in front of a dilapidated wooden cabin deep in the forest. They weren't smiling, just staring, blankly. Behind them the trees seemed too dark, too dense, as if they were pressing in. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but something about it unsettled me. Still, I tucked the photo into my journal and headed back to the small inn I was staying at. That night, I pinned the photograph to the wall across from my bed, thinking nothing of it. But when I woke up the next morning, the man on the far right had changed positions. He was no longer facing the camera. He was facing me. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes, staring at the photograph. The morning sun spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. But the photo, it looked different. One of the figures, an older man in a trench coat, was no longer facing the cabin with the others. He had turned slightly, his head now angled as if watching something off camera. No, as if watching me. I took the photo down, examining it up close. No crease, no smudge, no indication it had ever been different. But I knew what I saw. I even checked the snapshot I took on my phone the night before. It matched the original version, before the man turned. Now the print and the digital copy were different. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had mixed up the angle. Maybe I was tired. Jet lag, low blood sugar, some rational excuse. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the image, I couldn't help but feel like the man's eyes were following me. Not just from the picture but from somewhere closer. Like he had stepped partway out of the frame. I turned the photo face down on the table before I went to sleep. Just in case. But when I woke the next morning, it was back on the wall. And the second figure, the woman in the middle, was now gone. I froze. The photo had been back on the wall when I woke, taped neatly in the exact same spot, though I clearly remembered turning it face down on the desk before bed. More disturbing was what had changed. The woman in the center, tall, with a long coat and braided hair, was no longer in the photograph. Not moved. Not altered. Just gone. The group of 5 was now only 4. The cabin still loomed in the background, but where she had stood was a vague outline of trees and shadows. As though she had never been there at all. I flipped through my camera roll. The digital copy still showed all 5 figures. My photo time-stamped and untouched. But the print? It was erasing them, one by one. I tried calling the old man Petru. No answer. I even drove back to the house in the woods. No one was there. It looked abandoned, as if no one had lived there in years. A window was cracked. The front door hung open. Inside, dust, cobwebs, rotted furniture. No signs of life. No signs of the man who handed me the photograph. That night, I decided to stay up and watch it. I set up a small desk lamp, positioned myself across from the wall, and kept my eyes fixed on the photo. I told myself I wouldn't blink, wouldn't sleep. Hours passed. Midnight. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. At exactly 3:13 a.m. the lamp flickered. The temperature in the room dropped. And as I sat in the cold glow of the weak light, I watched the man in the trench coat blink. What? Slowly. Deliberately. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. The photo fluttered to the floor, and in that brief moment I swore I heard a soft click, like an old camera shutter snapping shut. When I picked up the photograph again, the cabin behind them looked different. The door, which had once been closed, was now slightly open. The moment the cabin door in the photo cracked open, something changed in me. I couldn't explain it, but I felt exposed. As if the photograph wasn't just changing, it was reacting, responding, watching. I couldn't sleep or eat. I had to know where it came from, who the people were, why they were vanishing. I drove 3 towns over to a regional archive center in Cluj-Napoca. With the help of a skeptical, chain-smoking librarian named Ileana, I traced the photograph back to a local academic expedition in 1973. 5 university researchers had been dispatched into the Carpathian wilderness to document a series of folktales from a nearly extinct village called Veruiesti. According to the archives, the village had vanished decades ago, swallowed by forest, landslide, or silence. The record stopped abruptly. No official report of what happened to the researchers. I found one blurry photograph in an old newspaper clipping. Same people, same cabin. The headline: Expedition disappears near Witch's Hollow, locals blame forest spirits. One line in the article chilled me to my core. Villagers claim the camera used by the team captured more than images, something old watching through the lens. It got worse. Ileana pulled out an incident log handwritten in Romanian. One of the villagers who had interacted with the research team reported a strange dream, standing in front of the cabin, unable to move, while shadows danced behind the windows. He died 3 days later. The final note. They took a picture of something that should never have been seen. I returned to my hotel with my head spinning. I locked the photo in my suitcase, threw the suitcase in the closet, and left the light on all night. But the next morning, the suitcase was open, and the photograph was pinned back on the wall. Now only 2 figures remained in the image. And the door to the cabin? It was open wider. By now, I wasn't just afraid of the photograph. I was afraid of the night. The moment darkness fell, the room changed. The shadows deepened. The silence thickened. And the photograph, it almost hummed with tension, as though waiting for the clock to strike a specific hour. I covered it with a towel and shoved it back in the closet, but I could still feel its presence. As if the image were breathing just behind the door. Just out of sight. That night, I dreamed I was standing in front of the same wooden cabin. Mist drifted through the trees. The forest around me creaked and whispered. I looked down and realized I was holding a vintage camera, the kind with bellows and brass. I lifted it and snapped a photo. And then I saw them, figures in the window. One of them waved, and another pointed at me. I woke drenched in sweat. When I pulled the photo out the next morning, my hands trembling, I couldn't believe what I saw. One of the remaining men now had his hand lifted, as if waving. His expression was distorted, stretched in silent agony. And worse, the cabin window behind him now clearly revealed a shadowy figure watching from inside. The cabin, once blurry in the background, was now sharper, clearer. As if the image were pulling into focus, drawing me in. I checked my phone. The digital version matched the new version of the physical one. The photo, it wasn't just changing. It was remembering. I'd had enough. I tore the photo from the wall, stuffed it into a shoebox, and drove 30 kilometers to the next town over. In a clearing by the highway, I lit a match and dropped it onto the picture. Flames leapt up. For a moment I felt relief. But within seconds the fire fizzled into smoke. The photo lay in the ashes, completely intact. Not a single singe mark. No curl of heat on the edges. Impossible. I tried again, this time with a lighter and alcohol. Same result. I ran over it with my rental car. I stabbed it with a knife. I even drove to a chapel and placed it near the altar, hoping sacred ground would weaken whatever force clung to it. Nothing. That night I didn't sleep. I paced the room. Every time I glanced at the closet where I'd locked the photo, I swore I heard faint scratching. Not like paper on paper, no. This was wet. Like nails against damp wood. At 3:13 a.m., the same time the light flickered on the first night, my hotel room went completely dark. No lights. No power. No sound. Until I heard it. Click. The camera shutter. And then, on the desk across the room, my phone lit up. A new photo had appeared in my gallery. It showed me sleeping. But I hadn't taken it. And there, in the background of the image, was the cabin. I barely left the room the next day. I kept the curtains closed, taped the photo to the table and locked my phone in the minibar fridge, hoping that somehow isolating the two would break the connection. But the photo didn't care. It changed anyway. Now only one person remained. A young man in hiking gear. His face was pale, almost drained of detail, as if being forgotten. The background had grown darker too. The trees were no longer trees, they were looming, twisted, reaching things. Like skeletal arms trying to pull him into the cabin, which now stood with its door wide open. And inside, a figure. Its face was a smear of black, eyes too large, too bright. Watching. I stared at the photo for hours. Every few minutes I'd blink and something was different. The man's head tilted. The figure inside moved closer to the doorway. Eventually it stood just at the edge of the threshold. That night I heard scratching again. Not from the closet. From inside the wall. From behind the mirror. I smashed it hoping it would help. But what I found behind it chilled me more than anything yet. Taped to the wall, buried behind the mirror, was a second copy of the same photograph. Only this version had no people in it. Just the cabin. Just the trees. Just the door. Wide open. Waiting. I knew I wouldn't survive another night with that thing. The photograph no longer felt like paper and ink. It felt like a trap. A door I had been slowly opening without realizing. That night, I packed a bag, called a cab, and told myself I'd head straight to the airport. But when I reached for my passport, there it was. The photo. Right on top of my clothes. But this time it wasn't the same one. It was me standing in front of the cabin. The exact pose. Same clothes. Same bag slung over my shoulder. And behind me, the door of the cabin opened just enough to reveal something inside. Something reaching for my shoulder. I dropped it and ran out the door, but the hallway had changed. The lights flickered. The paint on the walls peeled in long, wet curls. The numbers on the doors were missing. I took the stairs. Or I tried to. They led upward, not down. And at the top was the cabin. No longer in the woods, but here. Inside the hotel. Standing between the wallpapered walls like it had always been. I don't remember how I got inside. Only that the door creaked open by itself. And I entered. Inside was darkness. And then click. I turned. There was no one there. Just an old camera sitting on a table, its lens glowing faintly. And next to it, the original photograph. Everyone was back in it. But one of the figures had changed. It was me. 3 weeks later. Paris. A college student named Leah browsed the shelves of a dusty antique bookstore tucked between two alley cafes. She wasn't looking for anything special, just something weird for her dorm wall. Something old and obscure. Near the back, she found a box marked Photographies Anciennes, €5. Flipping through sepia-toned wedding portraits and wartime postcards, one photo caught her eye. A black and white image of a wooden cabin in the woods. The sky above it was almost unnaturally dark, and though no people stood in front of the cabin, she could swear there was something in the window. A blur. A shape. Maybe a face? Intrigued, she bought it. That night, she pinned it beside her desk and forgot about it, until just after midnight when her roommate asked, "Hey, didn't your photo have trees in the background earlier?" Leah frowned, turning to look. The background had changed. Now, a path wound from the forest up to the cabin door. And standing at the edge of the woods was a man. His face was unclear, but his hand was raised as if waving.